right, so let's go ahead and wrap up chapter 11. So here we are looking at the cerebellum. Cerebellum means tiny brain. The cerebellum is inferior or below the occipital lobes, and this is it here. That's the cerebellum. It is has two lateral hemispheres separated by the dura mater. Falx cerebelli is what we call that sickle-shaped separation. It's made mostly of white matter with a thin layer of gray matter called the cerebral cortex. Alright, so the cut into the cerebellum there you can see here shows that tree-like, you can see that really looks like a tree right there, that tree-like pattern of white matter. That is called the arbor vitae. Arbor vitae means tree of life. And so that is then surrounded by gray matter. Next we have the cerebral peduncles. Okay. Before I move on to that, though, I need to tell you that there is a number of nuclei that are found in the cerebellum, in the arbor vitae area. But the largest one of those is what we call the dendate nucleus, and we'll talk about that a little bit. The cerebellar peduncles are nerve tracts which allow communication with other parts of the central nervous system. The inferior peduncles bring sensory information in that tell us where body parts are regarding the position of body parts. And then the middle peduncles, okay, so here is the inferior peduncle right here, and then here is the middle peduncle, and that transmits information about the desired position of where these body parts should be. Where do we want them? So inferior says where they are, middle says where we want them to be. So this is a good summary here of some of the major parts of the brain coming from our last lecture and ending up into this one. I believe our last lecture went from 1 to 4, but it was getting really long, so I had to go ahead and cut it off there. And so cerebellum kind of starts us off on this end portion here. But this is a really good slide to study. Very good summary. So let's study this slide. Alright, so the peripheral nervous system. This consists of nerves branching out from the central nervous system on the periphery, or the side of our body, coming to the outside. Well, not to the outside, but away from, laterally from the brain and the spinal cord, from the central nervous system. So this includes cranial nerves and spinal nerves as well. The peripheral nervous system can be divided into two different sections, somatic and autonomic. Okay, so somatic and autonomic. Soma generally refers to body, so we often talk about soma cells. Those are body cells. So somatic division is going to be related more to physical body aspects here. And so somatic division is the cranial and spinal nerves. Those connect the central nervous system to skeletal muscles and skin, so to the rest of the body. This oversees our conscious activity, what we are aware of. Autonomic is those things that are like automatic. All right, so the autonomic division includes fibers that connect to the central nervous system, or from the central nervous system to things like the viscera. I'm sorry, I've got hair here. Viscera of the heart, stomach, glands, intestines, and this really oversees the subconscious, really important activities. Those are things that we don't think about but are vital to life. Alright, so this is a good kind of overview slide here that I would definitely try to draw this out and make this into a diagram that you memorize. So you could start with the nervous system at the top, and then branch it out to central nervous system, and then peripheral, and then break it down from there and commit that to memory. And that's going to really help you to understand and think about what falls where as you study. And you can also color code this: central nervous system in one color, peripheral in another, and then you could break that down into somatic and autonomic. Like you could do peripheral purple and somatic red, autonomic blue, or vice versa. Whatever makes sense to you, but that's going to help you to really put this into that long-term memory storage. All right, so this is a peripheral nerve. Remember, structure determines function. So a peripheral nerve is made of connective tissue that surrounds some nerve fibers. We've got the epineurium here, which is the outermost layer. You can see the endings here, the little Schwann cells here. We've got the perineurium, which is going to be around. Remember, peri means around. The nodes of Ranvier, which are the gaps in between. Okay, so this is just the general structure of a peripheral nerve. All right, so nerves and how they are classified. Nerves are generally bundles of fibers. They can be classified by what they do, their function. Sensory nerves that have only sensory neurons and they conduct impulses to the brain and spinal cord. They tell the brain about the environment. What are we sensing? What is our outside external environment like? All right. They tend to have long dendrites with short axons, and you can see this over here. We've got sensory nerves right here, motor nerves here, and then these are going to be more like your interneurons. Okay, it says relay, it's going to be kind of like an interneuron. And so sensory nerves have long dendrites, short axons. Motor nerves have only motor fibers and conduct impulses to muscles or glands. All right, so they tend to have short dendrites and long axons. So their structure is basically based on what it needs to be in order for their function to work right. And then we have mixed nerves, which can have both types. Okay, so both sensory and motor nerve bundles. All spinal nerves, that is important, are mixed nerves except for the first pair. Okay, except for the first pair. All right, so we're going to classify a little bit more. We have general somatic efferent. So we're going to look again at afferent and efferent. General somatic efferent. So these fibers carry motor impulses outward from the body. Remember, efferent, think exit, from the brain or spinal cord to those skeletal muscles, to those effectors, to stimulate those things to contract or to stimulate glands. Okay. Then we have general, so somatic body going to the major things of the body. Then we have general visceral efferent fibers. Well, what is visceral? You think of your visceral more internal organs. Okay, so these are efferent as well. So they are exiting and going to outward from the brain or the spinal cord to smooth muscles, and glands that are associated with internal organs. That would be things like signaling your intestines to undergo peristalsis. All right. Somatic efferent would be sending those motor impulses, telling your muscles to contract in order to shiver to warm the body up. Next we have general somatic afferent fibers, and these carry sensory impulses inside to the brain or the spinal cord from receptors that are in the skin and skeletal muscles. Okay, so these are bringing us information. Afferent is telling us about what our environment is like. General visceral afferent fibers carry those impulses, sensory impulses, to the central nervous system from blood vessels and internal organs. This would be things like stretch receptors in your bladder. How do you know when your bladder is full? Well, you have stretch receptors in your bladder that send a signal that tell the body this is getting full, this is getting full. They respond to that pressure from the stretch, and so then your brain can go and tell you to go and void your bladder, urinate. We've got special somatic efferent fibers that carry motor impulses outward from the brain to the muscles to be used in things like chewing, swallowing, speaking, and forming facial expressions. And then we also have some special viscerant afferent fibers that carry those sensory impulses inward to the brain from olfaction and taste receptors. Olfactory receptors are our sense of smell, and our taste and smell are often related, and that's not just in our head, that's actual. It's actually, they do come together. So special somatic afferent fibers carry those sensory impulses inward from the brain from receptors that deal with sight, hearing, and equilibrium, so our senses. So these are our cranial nerves, and you are going to need to know the location of these cranial nerves and identify them in lab, but you are also going to need to know if they are motor or sensory or both. And so we're going to learn as a mnemonic device to help you remember those. I'm also giving you a link for a diagram that I normally do in class, but there's a guy, Armando Hasdugan, that has done these, and they're color-coded with red and blue for sensory and motor, or motor and sensory. I can't remember which one's red, which one is blue. And I'm going to give you a base diagram so that you can go through and follow through with him. And if you will do this, you're going to learn these so easily because you have these visual depictions of what goes where. And every time I think about which nerves do what, I can picture this in my head. Now, honestly, you would probably be better off drawing it out on your own, but you may not have time. If you don't have time, I'm going to put my little rudimentary drawing sheet that I made for in-class use up there for you to use with this. I may actually make it an assignment for you to do this one just so that you can see how beneficial this is, all right? But one way or the other, this will be on Blackboard for you to use. And if you are in class and you're watching this, I will force you to do it because it is that important. Color coding and visual imagery is so much easier for your brain to remember. Your brain can remember a picture much easier than it can words. And then when you tie color to that, you are adding neural connections. You are making shortcuts, and you're actually laying down new little pathways to help you remember. Okay? The more of those connections you make, the easier it is to remember something. So take advantage of these neurological aspects of your brain and help you in your studying and your learning. I think I was in my third year of college before I really figured out techniques of studying besides just rote memorization that really, really helped. Color coding was one of those key things. And yes, it might work better for some than others, but it does work for everyone. Okay, there are some other things you can do, like outlining concepts and making your own compare and contrast charts when reading the text and things like that. If you ever want study tips on that kind of thing, please let me know. I will be more than happy to help you. All right, so on to this slide now. All right, so the numbers here are designate. They tell us the order in which the nerve arises or comes out from the brain. From the anterior portion here, to the posterior portion here. So it's the order they are coming out from the brain. All right. So the cranial nerves arise from the brainstem except for the pairs of olfactory and optic. And these are really important for you to learn, okay? Most cranial nerves, are mixed, but some are associated with special senses like smell and vision and only have sensory fibers. Others innervate or go through muscles and glands that are made of motor fibers with limited sensory function. And so, like I said, you're going to need to know the name, all right, and the number, the Roman numeral, and you're also going to need to know if they are motor, sensory, or both, all right? And so we have some mnemonics. We'll go over those. So this is the first mnemonic device. Now, truthfully, mnemonic devices work better if you make up your own, because then it is, again, making an association with something that you already have in your brain. So they do work better. But sometimes we don't have time to do that, or we're not very creative. And so this is one that I did use myself. Sometimes I made up my own, and sometimes I looked them up. Do be careful looking up the medical mnemonics. They are not always G-rated, so just a word of caution there, all right? Make up your own and do whatever you do that helps you remember it the most. That's all that matters, okay? I also really, really like this picture. Can you guess why I really like this picture here? It's color-coded, all right? So if you could draw this out, color-coded, and label it, that would be great. And then you could outline it in one color for motor and one color for sensory, and maybe black for mixed. That would help you learn it as well. But that's just an alternative that you could do to the Armando video that I'm going to post. So here's the mnemonic, and if you're not familiar with mnemonics, I'm going to explain how to use these. On old Olympus towering top, a Finn and German feud some hops. Let's see if I can use my pen well enough here. Okay, so O, O, O. On old Olympus, and look here, towering tops, a Finn, and now let's look at this one right here, a Finn and German. So what's wrong here? This says vestibulocochlear nerve. Well, that has an alternative name. That is auditory. Auditory. Vestibulocochlear. And you've probably heard of cochlear implants. And I'm sorry, these pens don't write very neatly on here. Not that I have neat handwriting, all right? And so you can write vestibulocochlear, or you can write auditory so it goes with the mnemonic, all right? Whatever you want to do. I will take either of those terms, okay? And so, let's see. On old Olympus towering tops, a Finn and German viewed spinal accessory nerve or accessory nerve some hops. All right, hops is how you make beer. So I'm sure this was, again, a medical student mnemonic device. And so if you learn that and practice it, but that's also the key, you got to practice it, writing it out from memory. First you learn the sentence, write the letters, and then you start learning what each of the letters mean, and then that will automatically be in order, and you'll know the Roman numerals. But do practice writing your Roman numerals, because I know a lot of you younger guys haven't used these very much, okay? So practice those. Alright, so this is the mnemonic to help you remember the function, sensory, motor, or both. This has a few different versions. I went for the G-rated version. Some say marry money, but my brother says big brains matter most. Alright, and so again, you list them out. Some say marry money, but my brother says big brains matter most. So practice that, list out the letters, and then practice writing. This one's a little easier because you already know sensory, motor, or both, okay? And so practice that out, all right? And then I would actually myself, I would draw this brain out and I would label everything. It's going to help you in lab as well, greatly help you in lab. In fact, often in lab on the exam, I will make you list these out. Alright, I'm trying really hard to get recorded, not making those really funny faces that I always seem to be making when I'm being recorded. Alright, olfactory nerve number 1. The olfactory nerve is associated with olfaction. Olfaction is our sense of smell. This only includes sensory neurons, and you can see in this picture here, and if you watch that Armando and he draws this out, you will see these right there. Those are little hairs that sense down. Those are actually neurons, okay? So they only have sensory neurons. They are bipolar neurons in the lining, you can see here on that picture, of the nasal cavity. Those are actual olfactory receptors, and those pick up chemicals, and that's what we smell, is the chemicals, and we take those chemicals and transmit them and convert them into something that we can make sense in our brain. All right, olfactory bulbs are extensions of the cerebral cortex beneath the frontal lobe. Damage to these can cause an impaired sense of smell, all right, which wouldn't be very fun, would it? All right, so that's the first cranial nerve, and you can see that this here, and you can also see them over here, right there, okay? Optic nerve 2, well, optic has to do with eyes, so this is the cranial nerve number 2, I should say. It is a sensory nerve, and it leads from the eyes to the brain. These are, of course, associated with vision. The cell bodies of these neurons form ganglion, little gangs or clusters, and they form cell layers in the eyes, and axons pass through the optic foramina, so the little holes in the orbits of the eyes. Okay, damage to these, of course, would cause blindness in the visual field, so you could have spots of blindness depending on what is damaged. Now I want you to notice that I have color coded a little bit here for you. If it is sensory here, I've told you, and I've put it in blue. Alright, so to help you to remember that, I try to use color coding as well. Alright, the third cranial nerve is the oculomotor. Well, ocu, of course, you're probably thinking eye already, and motor, you're thinking movement. So oculomotor nerves. These arise from the midbrain and pass into the eye orbits. One part of each nerve attaches to a voluntary muscle in the eyelids and for eye movement, which is going to be opening, I don't know if you can see that, or raising of the eyelid. Okay. Damage causes what we call ptosis, which is a drooping eyelid, or even sometimes double vision. And that's because these also innervate 4 of the 6 extrinsic or external eye muscles, which you can see really well in this diagram. Okay. The nerve is part of the autonomic system and directs involuntary eye muscles that adjust for light and focus the lenses. We have proprioceptors, and these are neurons associated with particular receptors that respond to skeletal muscle contraction. And since these contribute directly to motor muscle control, we call them motor nerves. Right? The way these can cause double vision is, and I know this because my son had this condition, the muscles on the eye here can be kind of in the wrong place, or instead of the eye being round, it could be a little more oval shaped, which has to do with how your vision is occurring. And so if you have one that is normal and one that's a little abnormal, they can actually, and this is what happened for my son, you can have what's called strabismus or amblyopia, which looks the same. They both look like lazy eye, but lazy eye is just related to the lens in normal vision, where strabismus is actually related to the shape, and they go in and they remove these muscles and they can move where they're attached to, so it accommodates. And what happens is, if you're not seeing both the same, your brain begins to just shut the one eye off because it can't handle having two pictures, and so it shuts the one eye off, and you would eventually go blind if you don't get that taken care of. So it's really important, but it was actually fairly easy to fix, so interesting thing there. Alright, so the 4th trochlear nerve, this is the primary motor nerve. Damage here again causes double vision and the inability to look downward, so you can see it is going up there to the superior oblique muscle. This innervates that particular muscle, all right? And so this does have some sensory function and proprioception, but it is classified as motor because that is its predominant function. All right, the 5th cranial nerve here, this is the trigeminal nerve. These arise from the pons. They are mixed nerves with extensive sensory areas. The main sensory nerve, this is the main sensory nerve to the face and what we call muscles of mastication. Mastication is chewing, and these include branches, the 3 branches called ophthalmic, maxillary, and mandible. All right, and if you do that drawing from Armando online, or that you will see these 3 branches listed out. Okay, and so it separates off and it does these 3 particular functions. The ophthalmic consists of sensory fibers that bring impulses to the brain and the surface of the eye, the tear gland, skin, scalp of the forehead, and the upper eyelid. Maxillary, you can kind of figure out it's going to be around the maxilla, if you remember the maxilla from skeletal. It carries impulses to the upper teeth, gums, and lip. Okay, upper gum. Also the lining of the palate and some of the facial skin. And then the mandibular division includes motory and sensory fibers. This transmits from the scalp, the lower jaw, and teeth, gum, and lip. And that's kind of what this weird drawing is splitting out for you. So this one would be regarded as both. Oh, this also, mandibular also supplies, almost forgot, the muscles of mastication for chewing on the floor of the mouth. Damage here would produce a loss of sensation and an impairment in chewing. And it can also cause increased pain here that's often mistaken for dental problems, and that is called trigeminal neuralgia. So this is just a good illustration here of that trigeminal nerve, and you can see the three branches pretty clearly. So cranial nerve number 6 is the abducens. This is small. It originates from the pons near the medulla oblongata, and it enters at the orbits of the eye, and it supplies motor impulses to external eye muscles, and motor nerve with some, it does have some proprioceptors. Okay, so this also helps to move the eyes. We have a lot of muscles to move the eyes. So this is showing you yes, I need to click on it there, the innervation of these three main nerves that innervate muscles of the eye. All right, so cranial nerve 6 here, this is the facial nerve. This is a nerve of facial expression. That's the motor function. It also has a sensory function for the taste buds, the anterior 2/3 of the tongue. The taste buds on the front 2/3 of the tongue, and helps with the production of saliva and some tearing. Damage can produce sagging facial muscles and a disturbed sense of taste, which we would miss sweet and salty, and that is actually called Bell's palsy. All right, so here's that vestibulocochlear nerve, and you can see here, it can sometimes be called acoustic or auditory nerve. I do not want you to give me acoustic. I want you to be aware that you may hear it that way, but I want you to either say vestibulocochlear or auditory, and I bet y'all are going to find auditory a little bit easier. So this nerve has sensory nerves coming from the medulla oblongata. It has two branches, the vestibular branch and the cochlear branch. So that's where we get vestibulocochlear. The vestibular branch is located in some ganglia near the inner ear, where receptors that sense changes in position are. Cochlear branch is going to be in groups or ganglia of the cochlea. The impulses from here are going to pass through the medulla oblongata and the midbrain, and then transmitted on up to the temporal lobe. This helps to provide the auditory nerve here, hearing and sense of balance. Damage then will produce things like deafness, dizziness, nausea, loss of balance, and what we call nystagmus, which is uncontrolled eye movements. Oh, this one also can affect, of course, your balance and coordination. This is the glossopharyngeal nerve. It is mixed. Glosso means tongue or speech. And so this is associated with the tongue and the pharynx. It has mixed nerve. It's a mixed nerve that innervates or goes to supplies the salivary glands and muscles in the pharynx associated with swallowing. So damage here could give you some issues with swallowing. Next, we have the vagus nerve, and the vagus nerve originates from the medulla oblongata and it extends down through the neck into the chest and abdomen. This is a mixed nerve. It has both somatic and autonomic branches, and it functions with things like the thoracic and abdominal viscera, carotid sinuses. You can see that it goes to many, many visceral organs. And there's that saying, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, and I like to say, well, what happens in Vegas in the body goes everywhere. But be careful with that. When I say everywhere, I just mean it goes to all these different things. So it's kind of a busy guy, all right? And so this one is classified as both, and it is autonomic. Next, we have the spinal accessory nerve. It is okay to say accessory nerve. I do prefer spinal accessory nerve. These originate in the medulla oblongata and the spinal cord. These have both cranial and spinal branches. The cranial branch of the accessory joins the vagus nerve and helps carry impulses to the soft palate, pharynx, larynx. Spinal branches descend down into the neck and supply motor fibers for the trapezius, sternocleidomastoid muscles. It's a motor nerve that also has some proprioceptor fibers as well. The sternocleidomastoid and trapezius are part of the motor function. Of course, that's head and neck. And so damage here can cause impaired shoulder movement. So, cranial nerve 12 is the hypoglossal. Hypo means below, glossal tongue, so below the tongue. Hypoglossal nerves arise from the medulla oblongata, go to the tongue, and they function in speaking and chewing and swallowing. So the motor function is speaking, chewing, swallowing. Damage here results in the inability to protrude the tongue. So that would be a pretty clear indication. If you couldn't protrude your tongue, then you may have some issues here. It could also be muscular as well. So this is your summary slide. You need to pretty much know all this information. So I would work on organizing this. I would definitely start with that YouTube video that I'm going to have a link for. That's going to help you tremendously if you will work on that one. So have a great day.